Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have been under a federal conservatorship since 2008. So that means that the federal government makes all their lending decisions and collects most of the profit. The reason why this happened goes all the way back to when the government created Fannie Mae in 1938 after the Great Depression. Before 1938, banks would just have to hold their mortgages for 30 years until they got paid off. So this limited lending because they only had but so much money. And on top of that, when some banks failed from having too much of their money tied up in long-term loans, it caused people to panic and try to cash out all their money, which in turn caused even more banks to fail. And back then, there was no FDIC insurance. So if the bank failed, all the money people had at those banks were gone. This was a big part of the Great Depression. So to solve this problem, the banks would sell their loans to Fannie Mae. And then Fannie Mae would bundle those loans and sell them to investors as mortgage-backed securities. This allowed banks to have more money to lend and also ease their lending guidelines because now they were backed by a government enterprise. It also caused interest rates to be more of an industry standard because all the loans were getting sold to and backed by Fannie Mae. Eventually in 1968, the government privatized Fannie Mae, and 2 years later also created Freddie Mac to compete with Fannie Mae. So at this point, they were both private companies, but government sponsored, meaning they had federal support, but can now create their own lending guidelines and collect their own profits. After this change, the company skyrocketed in size because they had the benefits of being a normal for-profit company, but without the risk of complete failure like a normal company would have. So essentially they took on too many risky loans from unqualified borrowers, knowing if they needed it, the government would bail them out. And in 2008, that's exactly what happened. Over time, lenders took on riskier and riskier loans because they knew they could get sold on the secondary market. And Fannie and Freddie were okay with that because they knew they had government backing. Since it was easier for people to buy a home, prices grew. And when people started defaulting on their mortgages because they were beyond their means to pay them back, the whole housing market and mortgage system crumbled on itself. So the government injected its own money into Fannie and Freddie to bail them out since they were such a large portion of the mortgage market, and they wanted to prevent even worse damage to the entire economy. From that point, when they bailed them out, they have had a conservatorship in place and fully control all their operations.